Please, would you listen to Scott Galloway? Please, Scott.
My name's Scott Galloway. I teach at NYU, and I appreciate your time. So we have 140 slides in 1,800 seconds, so let's light this candle. I believe you can't scale a company beyond 100 million users and 100 billion in value unless you speak directly and strongly to a specific instinct or organ. Despite our subscriptions to the Washington Post or our graduate degrees, I think we're animals. And the key to marketing and strategy is to understand why it is we behave the way we do. And typically, those are the most simple things in the world, but things we don't want to admit to ourselves. So in sum, Google is modern man God. Since we emerged from caves, there's been a competition among 3,500 super beings trying to fill this void of our competitive advantage of a species is our brain, such that we're expelled from the human body prematurely. It's large enough and robust enough to ask very complicated questions, but not robust enough to answer them. So create that void where we need a super being, where we can send any query, which is effectively a prayer, into the universe, hoping there's some sort of divine intervention that sees every prayer and can send something back that has greater authority than any other entity or priest, rabbi, scholar, mentor, boss. Anyone who has kids has prayed. You have your world of stuff, you have your world of work, you have your world of friends. Something comes off the rails with one of your kids, the whole world shrinks to the universe of your kid. Will my kid be all right? You have kids, you've issued that prayer. Symptoms and treatment of croup. We now have a God. As we become more affluent and educated as a society, our reliance on a super being declines, but we still have this need to answer questions from an all-knowing authority, and Google is our God. If you do not believe Google is your God, imagine your name and face, and this is relevant to the conference, above everything that has gone into that query box. It knows if you're about to get engaged, it knows if you're about to get divorced, it knows your fetishes, it knows what diseases you have, what diseases you've exposed yourself to. Google knows more about the real you than any entity in history, forward or backward. Google is our God. Moving further down the torso. One of the wonderful things about our species is we not only need to be loved, kids with poor nutrition and good affection have better outcomes than kids with good nutrition and poor affection. But the strongest indicator of whether you're going to make it to 100 years of age, the fastest growing demographic group in America, we're all going to have centenarians in our families within 20 or 30 years, is in reverse order of importance. Number 3 is genetics. People like to think it's number 1 so they can treat their bodies like shit and cite Uncle Joe lived to 95, so I'll live to 88. Number 2 is lifestyle, and some don't smoke and don't be obese, and you screen out about 2/3 of early carcinogens and cardiac issues. But the number 1 signal of whether you'll join the triple-digit club is very simple. How many people do you love? Or specifically, how many people do you take care of? And it makes a lot of sense. In your lizard brain, it's assessing how much value you add to society. When you're sweating, you can fool it into believing that you're hunting prey or building housing for the Klan. When you're stressing at work or mentally challenged on a crossword puzzle, you fool the lizard brain into thinking that you're making decisions for the Klan and it'll let you stick around a little bit longer. But the physical and mental nuance of caregiving is the most important thing in this species, and there's something about that process that releases a cholesterol or releases a hormone that clears out the bad cholesterol, and caring for others lets you stick around. I think Facebook taps into, at least initially, the notion that we want to catalyze and strengthen first and second order relationships, mostly through images, which is their killer app that creates greater empathy towards other people. I believe Facebook is in fact love. Moving further down the torso. Since again we emerged from caves, more has been the winning business strategy of our species. The penalty for too little is the worst death in the world that has been the greatest cause of mortality in our species, and that's starvation. So open your cupboards, open your closets, you have 10 to 100x more than you need, and you rationally know this, but it's immediately washed over with the instinct of, I'd still like more, I still want more. The penalty for too much is gluttony, lethargy, diabetes with a 20 or 30-year lag, but it's nowhere near the penalty for too little. So the economy that offers more for less is the fastest growing economy in the world. That's right now is China. And typically the company that offers more for less better than anyone else is the most valuable company in the world. In the 90s it was Walmart. Now it's tech companies. The most valuable company in the world by the end of this year will be Amazon. Amazon's doing a better job of more for less than any other company right now. Moving further down the torso, Apple. So what's the number one instinct, David? Wrong. If I come at you with a knife, you're not thinking about sexy time. That is sexy? Yeah. I make a room sexier by leaving it. Anyways, Apple is pretty much tapped into this notion of the second most important instinct. Most important is survival. Second most important is procreation. And the reason why procreation is such a valuable business strategy is that almost everybody, actually everybody in this room woke up this morning and the instinct survival box was checked. Despite the headline news and the situation room, the likelihood of you dying in the hands of another human being is the lowest today as it has been in history. So we immediately go to the second thing, and that is, one, all men in this audience have been taught for millions of years that their primary objective is to, one, survive, and once they have that box checked, their number two objective is to spread their DNA to the four corners of the earth. And as a result, they will buy watches for $11,000 that are worth $1,200 of plastic, steel movements. And the reason I buy this, if I'm honest with myself, is such that I can communicate to women that if you mate with me, your kids are more likely to survive than if you mate with someone wearing a Swatch watch. It's okay to be politically incorrect about men, but let's be politically incorrect about women. And there's much, I used to get a lot more laughs about a year ago. Now no one knows how to react to these jokes. Women are also, for millions of years, have been taught, one, survive, and two, try and solicit as many inbound offers of DNA such that you can put up your much finer filter and pick the smartest, strongest, and fastest DNA. And this chocolate and peanut butter combination of DNA trying to get everywhere and much finer filters trying to pick the strongest DNA is the basis of evolutionary progress. So we want to signal that we have good DNA, and it's something we're willing to pay a lot of money for. And this is the new signal that you have good genes. It says that you live in a city, it says you're an artisan, it says that you make a good living and can spend $1,100 on something that costs $280. It basically says, mate with me. Just as paying with a Discover card, having an Android phone, or listening to ad-supported Pandora says, do not have sex with me. This is the new feathers. In business, you want to immediately target the most irrational of our instincts and our organs. You don't want to compete against the brain. Rational purchases are terrible because the brain is an outstanding competitor and will do millions of trade-offs every minute and starch all the margin from your product. But if you target the irrational organs, you can make a fantastic living. The industry that built the most shareholder value from World War II to the introduction of Google was the CPG industry that targeted the heart. Here's a high caloric paste that will keep your children alive for a low cost. That's appealing to the brain. If you give your kids this high caloric paste, you care for them more than other mothers. You're a better mother. Why? Because choosy moms choose Jif. You can feel more European, you can feel more patriotic, you can feel more funny. And basically Procter & Gamble, Clorox, and Unilever were able to take 30 cents worth of solvents and soaps and turn them into $3 expressions of emotion and love, targeting the heart. The other irrational organ, it's pretty easy to guess, but men and women will spend a great deal of money, even when they're in monogamous relationships. They want to be more attractive to others and will buy $260,000 canary yellow Ferraris that go 200 miles an hour and domains that have speed limits of 55 miles an hour. Women will continue to buy $800 ergonomically impossible shoes because the notion of trying to spread our DNA, or again, select the best DNA, is this irrational feeling that continues to result in the most irrational margins in history. The sector that has built more wealth in the last 20 years, if you take out inherited wealth and finance, is not tech, it's luxury. Wealthiest man in Europe, Bernard Arnault. Numbers 2 and 3 are the signs of Inditex, Zara, and H&M. The second wealthiest family in New York, behind Michael Bloomberg, is the Lauders, who again are in the business of procreation. Luxury and appealing to our reproductive organs is a fantastic business. These companies tap into all four, and as a result, they've been able to aggregate more economic influence than any entities in history. At the end of the Great Recession, the combined market capitalization of these companies was equal to the GDP of Niger. As of today, there are only 4 countries with GDPs greater than the combined market capitalization of these 4 companies: Japan, Germany, China, and the US. And I believe these entities today combined are more powerful than any other organizations in the world possibly with the exception of the US and/or China. We're also consolidating around one industry. About 12 years ago, we saw a mix of the 5 most valuable companies, from petroleum to financial services to tech. Now it is all tech. The 5 most valuable companies in the world, all from big tech. So that is basically my book. I go through the kind of evolutionary anthropology and the rise of big tech, what you can learn from it, sussing out the success factors of the 4, applying them to new businesses as a means of screening investments and new ideas, and talking about how big tech will change our prospects for competing, advice to businesses, advice to individuals in terms of how they allocate their own capital. My revised edition coming out in a few months includes what I'll call the chapter I didn't write. And that is, let me start off by saying I love these companies. I use all their products. Most or all of them are clients of mine. These companies saved my ass. In 2008, I woke up right about the time me and my girlfriend had the bad judgment to get pregnant. And my first son comes rotating out of my girlfriend, and I wake up after the Great Recession, and I don't have nearly as much money as I thought I had. And I made one decision, and that was I was going to take all my money and put it in 2 stocks, and I put it in Apple and Amazon. Apple and Amazon literally saved my ass economically. Amazon is now the largest recruiter out of my class at NYU. I've worked with these companies. They've been super nice to me. They invite me to all their universities and days and pay me extraordinary fees to come up and talk about stuff. And after spending the last 24 months of my life examining everything about these companies, I've come to one basic conclusion, and that is I'm 110% convinced that these companies should be broken up. And I'm going to go through why. There's some irrational emotional arguments for why they should be broken up that I think undermine the legitimate reasons they should be broken up. So let's go through some of the irrational ones. The first one that you hear all the time is that they're evil. These are bad entities, that they have some sort of soul, and that they're evil. Social media powers fake news. About half the traffic to fake news sites comes from social, whereas legitimate sites only get about 1/10 of their traffic from social media. So it's the fuel for this stuff. My company was acquired a year ago, so I'm not allowed to say, I'm not supposed to say anything political. I'm never supposed to reference anything sexual. I'm not supposed to curse. So there is absolutely no way I'm going to say Zuckerberg has become Putin's bitch. I'm just not going to say it. So the notion that these platforms had been weaponized, the initial response from Facebook was, it's crazy, this notion. Then we found out it was millions of people, and now we're finding out it was hundreds of millions. The only thing we know about big tech as it relates to being weaponized and our data being compromised, we just know it's going to get worse. You just know the onion's going to keep getting peeled back, and we're going to find more and more stuff that we're just not down with. This is Forbes' list of the most powerful people in the world. This is wildly inaccurate and an insult to big tech. By far, the most powerful person in the world is this individual who can take the mood up or down and gets to decide what 2.1 billion people a year, or 2.1 billion people see and what they feel, what they see. This is an individual who dropped out of college, who started a business based on evaluating women's physical appearance, and now oversees a community more vast than Christianity and can't be removed from office, and a year ago proposed a 3-class shareholder structure such that he could sell every one of his shares, have no economic stake in his company, and still control it. Imagine Castro, who came to power at 33, which is the same age as Mark Zuckerberg now. All dictators start out benign. Had not only influence over Cuba, but add the entire southern hemisphere, and then add India, and you're beginning to talk about the influence of Mark Zuckerberg. I also think he's the most tone-deaf CEO in technology. In the midst of all this controversy, they made a decision to launch a gateway drug called Messenger Kids. My kid is more socially adaptive and emotionally well-balanced because of social media, said no parent ever. And yet, in the midst of all this controversy, they decide to launch a gateway drug called Messenger Kids, which just gives you a sense of how incredibly tone-deaf this individual is. At conferences like this, you typically have representatives from the big 4, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. So I'd like to provide some definitions to help you sort through what they really mean when they're on stage. So when they say platform, What they really mean is we're a media company, we want to operate in a netherland of unprecedented multiples and no accountability, right? We're a technology platform, not a media firm, because media companies have a special relationship with the public, and that is they're assuming they're going to take some level of responsibility, that they feel that the fourth estate has a role in society that includes unbelievable influence, margins, and celebrity, which Facebook has warmly embraced. But unfortunately, Facebook seems to be allergic to the responsibilities or the social compact we have with media firms. They'll use terms like, it would be impossible for us to screen all the content. We don't want to be the arbiters of truth. Or they start acting as if they're big protectors of the First Amendment. What they're really saying is, we won't do anything that's unprofitable. These companies will continue to amass more and more targets and figure out more and more ways to attach information to those targets so they can sell to more and more advertisers. And anything that gets in the way of that, they will wrap in some sort of existential crisis. But at the end of the day, these firms will do nothing unless they're forced to that could potentially dent their profits. Innovation typically means elegant theft. Theft of data, theft of someone's time. Let's call them driver partners. General Motors peaked at 400,000 employees in the 70s. New employees there got $25 an hour. Driver partners from Uber averaged $12.25 an hour, and that's not even inflation adjusted. And there's 12,000 of them who will split with their investors about $70 billion in market cap, almost equivalent of Airbus. But they've reclassified 2.1 million driver partners as contractors such that they can't share in the equity and they don't get things like health insurance or unemployment insurance. We want to give voice to the unheard. That's the new one you hear from these folks when we talk about, can you screen your users or create some sort of identity such that we know who's on these things? Maybe you shouldn't have people weaponizing your platform who are doing things like ethnic cleansing and using it as a vehicle to communicate really awful ideas. No, we want to give voice to the unheard. That means we know we're wrong and have no intention of doing anything about it. And my favorite one that Facebook should just have printed up on T-shirts at this point is, we need to do better. We need to do better. This, again, means we know we're wrong and have no intention of doing anything about it. 50 million people from Cambridge Analytica. Whose fault is this? Are these firms at fault? Are they evil? I would argue they're not evil. I think they're doing their job. They're for-profit firms meant to be the economic engine of capitalism and create economic security for their shareholders and their families of the employees, and they're doing it. It's not their job to figure out what's good or bad for us or for the rest of the world. That's our job. We're supposed to elect people to hold these firms accountable and put in place laws and regulation. But this is what we're doing with our elected officials. When Facebook lies to the EU Competitiveness Commission and says, we could not share, it would be impossible for us to share data between the core platform and WhatsApp, so please approve our acquisition of WhatsApp. They say, okay, we approve it, we believe you, and then 90 days post-closing, spoiler alert, they figure it out. And the EU says we feel lied to, we're fining you $122 million, which is equivalent to 0.6% of the $19 billion acquisition price. If Mark Zuckerberg could take out an insurance policy to ensure that the acquisition of WhatsApp would close for 0.6%, called lying, shouldn't he take that policy out? We are telling these companies, vis-a-vis our elected officials, that, hey, this meter costs $100 every 15 minutes, but the ticket for violating the meter is 25 cents. So the smart shareholder thing to do for these companies is to lie and to break the law, because the downside is a minimum based on the scale of the capital they have. The consent decree that Google violated results in a $3 billion fine, which is 3% of their cash on hand. When the fine is announced, their stock went up the same day. Amazon can now threaten to go into an industry and shop on other people's credit cards. They announce they're buying Whole Foods. Their stock goes up by the amount of the acquisition price. Their competitor's stock goes down by the acquisition price. Wouldn't it be fun to be able to go shopping with someone else's credit card? A third of the value of the largest pure-play grocer in America, Kroger's, shed in between the time Amazon announced the acquisition and when it closed. A third of the value because Amazon announced it was acquiring a company 1/11th the size of Kroger's. Amazon, again, goes up whenever it announces acquisition and goes down. Nike goes up when they announce they're distributing on Amazon. Every other footwear company goes down. You effectively have a company that can perform Jedi mind tricks and start inflicting pain on someone else just by wishing it ill and cutting them off from the mother's milk of business, which is capital. So you have one company that could take any consumer stock in Europe or the US, could take the value of that company down 30% in 30 days with 30 press releases. The markets are failing. Key to the markets is that no one company has too much power. This company has too much power. If I make your cost of capital, your credit cards, your mortgage rate, a third more expensive within 30 days, you can't compete against me. Amazon can now add the market cap of FedEx in a single day when it announces a good quarter. And when it announces a good quarter, every other retailer goes down because the general assumption of the marketplace is what is good for Amazon is worse for the rest of retail. We have basically acquiesced, our government's basically thrown up the white flag, at least our municipal governments, to Amazon. In order to get Amazon to come to Chicago, Chicago is willing to give up the payroll taxes of their employees to Amazon, and they'll let them figure out how to spend that money. So Chicago, the municipality of Chicago has basically said, you're smarter than us. You can start taxing your employees and figuring out how to spend that money. We give up Amazon. You're now the municipal government here. People say, oh, it's not a monopoly. What are the markets telling us when Amazon's trading at a 48 times EBITDA multiple? Isn't the ultimate arbiter or the agnostic arbiter basically saying that at some point Amazon's going to be able to extract monopoly rents from consumers based on the multiple it's trading at right now? Amazon responds by saying, but wait, we're only 4% of retail. And that's a number, 4%. Here are some other numbers. They're 25% of all US retail growth, a third of all cloud revenue, the fastest and most profitable piece of technology. They're 44% of the most valuable channel in the history of business, and that's US e-commerce. They're 55% of all Black Friday sales. 2/3 of US households have a recurring revenue relationship with Amazon called Prime. More people have Prime than voted in the 2016 elections, and within 18 months, more people are going to have a cable pipe of stuff called Prime into their house than have cable television. 80% of wealthy households have Prime. I love that the White House wants to restrain AT&T from buying Time Warner. How ridiculous. AT&T has 130 million subscribers, 30 million DirecTV. That's a distribution of 160 million. And then Time Warner, great content, CNN, HBO, Adult Swim, Cartoon Network. Okay, is that scary? Well, Amazon has a cable TV company network called Amazon Prime that's in 80% of wealthy households, 2/3 of all US households, and spends $6.5 billion on original content, $5 billion, second most in the world, but AT&T needs to sell the Cartoon Network. Google has the largest video network in the world called YouTube, and an installed distribution on 2 billion Android devices. Apple has 25 million songs and 35 million videos, and is pre-installed on 1 billion iOS devices, but AT&T needs to sell Adult Swim. One of two things is happening. The call to restrict AT&T acquiring Time Warner is either insane, or we should have broken these companies up 10 years ago. Google now has a 92% share of a market search that by dollar volume is bigger than the entire advertising market of any nation with the exception of the US. Pretty soon it's going to blow by the US. What if there was one company with 92% share of all print, all TV advertising, all radio advertising, all classifieds, basically everyone that made those stalls that you'll be looking at downstairs. All media, all advertising, all impressions, 92% share one company. Would we be down with that? Facebook owns 4 of the top 5 apps. This isn't a phone, it's a delivery system for apps. 80% of your time on this thing is in-app, and one company owns 6 of the top 10 apps and 4 of the top 5, and has squared its sights on number 5 to put it out of business. We were all hoping that Snap would be the Facebook of video. We need a third player. We need to bust out of the duopoly. It would be good for the ecosystem. As it ends up, the Facebook of video is Facebook, specifically Instagram Stories, which is putting Snap out of business. I believe Snap is the walking dead and will either be acquired or be trading below $5 a share within the next 18 months. This is how Senator Richard Burr closed the Senate intelligence hearings listening to Facebook, Google, and Twitter apologize.
Don't let nation states disrupt our future. And you're the front line of defense for it. Please take that back to your companies. This hearing is adjourned.
Facebook, Twitter, and Google are the front lines. Let me give you a sense of how someone who doesn't live in DC feels about that. Fuck that. Our front lines are these guys, not the Zuck. My front lines are the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines, not Jack Dorsey. And the notion that our government has somehow decided that these kids are our front lines of defense is just plain unacceptable. So why are we so angry? I did this last night for my wife, and she's like, why are you so angry? I think we have grown to expect that technology plays a more important role in humanity than other industries. 1942, we gather 100,000 of our best and brightest in the southwest of the United States, and we enter a foot race with Hitler to get to the splitting the atom. And that's a pretty motivational speech. Hi, you've all been brought here to save the world. And if we don't figure this out quicker than the guys in Germany figure it out, it's the end of the world. And we figured it out using very basic technology and literally saved the world. A strip of ocean called the British Channel, the brains, brawn, and blood of the British, the Russians, and the American, respectively, and technology literally saved my mom's life. My mom in 1942 was a 4-year-old Jew who slept in the tube at night with a gas mask that was mimicked after Donald Duck, such that kids wouldn't be scared to put them on. I'm here because of technology. 25 years later, we get the band back together. We bring together 400,000 of the best and brightest Canadians, British, and Americans, and to be blunt, some former Nazi rocket engineers. And again, we pull off the impossible, and we put a man on a rock floating around our planet and somehow imagine to bring them home safely. Probably the most impressive feat of our species, given that a third of houses in the US at that time didn't even have indoor plumbing. Now we have 700,000 of the best and brightest. I know these people, they are the best and brightest. If you can program Python in Jakarta, Google will find you. If you're outstanding at UX in Tokyo, Apple will find you. The best and brightest from the four corners of the earth have been reassembled again. They are playing with lasers relative to the slingshots and squirt guns of the NASA Manhattan projects. And what has the greatest concentration of human IQ, creative ability, financial resources, technology, what has it been brought together to accomplish? Is it to create comity of man? Is it to solve world hunger? Is it to end conflict? I'm here to tell you I have figured it out. I know these companies real well, and the greatest amalgam and chemistry of humanity ever assembled has been brought together with one sole mission, and that's to sell another fucking Nissan. And I think it is hugely disappointing. Because they avoid taxes. This is Tim Cook testifying before.
We not only comply with the laws, but we comply with the spirit of the laws.
No, not really. The spirit of U.S. tax law isn't that you can issue your IP to the Isle of Man and then charge high-tax domains, suppressing their profits, and high-tax domains and increasing profits in low-tax domains. Apple is basically paying a 4% tax on the cash holdings overseas, which is the equivalent of the GDP of Denmark right now. By the way, that cash should have never been over there. All this whining about bringing it home so they can create jobs, that cash never should have been over there to begin with. Walmart's paid $64 billion in taxes since the Great Recession. Amazon has paid $1.4. What does it mean when the most valuable, successful company in the world pays no taxes? It means less successful companies have to pay more taxes. We have institutionalized a regressive corporate tax structure. Alexa, is this a good thing? Meanwhile, Amazon has added the market capitalization of Walmart in the last 3 months to its market cap, despite paying a 40th of the taxes over the last 10 years. They destroy jobs. Google and Facebook will need to add 26,000 jobs this year to service the additional revenue. That's incorrect. They're going to grow $26 billion. Traditional media companies will have to lay off over 200,000 people because this is a zero-sum game now. Marketing is a zero-growth industry. So whenever Facebook and Google take money out of the ecosystem, ad agencies suffer. You're going to have a lot of friends in the agency business. They're going to decide to spend more time with their families over the next 2.5 years. Every year, copywriters, agency planners, creative directors, you could fill up 4 Yankee stadiums and issue their pink slips every January 1. Courtesy of Facebook and Google. The problem with this is it's very hard to go after job destroyers. Just as manufacturers went after farmers and service companies went after manufacturers, we need job destroyers. So while this is bad, it's hard to say, okay, it's their fault. This is what companies and innovators do. I think the reason we break them up is because we're capitalists. I think all of those arguments are thoughtful conversations, but I don't think you can justify breaking companies up because of any of those things, because most of them are either not true or not valid or get in the way of capitalism. But I think there is a capitalist argument to break these guys up. In order to have a strong capitalist ecosystem, you have to have private property, voluntary exchange, wage labor, and most importantly, you have to have competitive markets. And I think these companies are no longer really competitive, or they're anti-competitive, or abusing the monopoly power. Google used to take us to the best place. Now it takes us to another place where they can monetize our traffic to a greater extent. Amazon is basically destroying retail with a cheaper cost of capital and investing at a pace no other company can keep up with. They basically conspired with fanatical investors, technology, and 400 million consumers to put all other retailers out of business and starch all the margin from brands. When they go up, everybody else goes down. Also, the notion of breaking companies up isn't a punishment. It's not that these companies are bad. It's just that a part of the economic cycle is when any one or two companies acquire too much influence, we move in and we reoxygenate the system and we break them up. This is the market share of other companies at the time we broke them up. Now look at where we are with these guys. We're sort of at that time. And people kind of frame it as good versus evil. No, this is a part of the economic cycle. This isn't anything unusual. And it's not a left wing or a right wing. Teddy Roosevelt was the initial individual who came up with the idea of trust busting. The people who put him in office, the railroads, good people, nice people, tremendous value, tremendous innovation. He was like, great, we're going to oxygenate the system and break you guys up. Ma Bell weren't bad people, but we unleashed a torrent of productivity, and it ended up there was a lot of things, including cell phones, data, and fiber optic, that was sitting fallow in Bell Labs because they didn't want to cannibalize their incredible monopoly-like business that got unleashed. So this isn't about punishing anybody. This is about keeping the good times going in an innovation economy where we need continued growth. We also need to get rid of the macho test. There's some notion somehow that big tech and companies have fomented that if you believe in regulation, you're somehow a socialist, or worse, you're European. This is how I'm introduced on Fox News. I go on Fox once a week because I like to get out of my bubble.
He's a socialist, but we'll have him on the show. You're a socialist. You are a socialist, are you not? You're an interesting guy because you're a socialist. Stern professor of business, Scott Galloway, frequent guest on the program, and an all-round good guy, despite his socialist past, is with us this morning.
I've been starting companies my whole life, but I'm a socialist. If DOJ had moved in on Microsoft in the late 90s, the object of every innovator's affection, Facebook, would not exist. 70,000 people, $700 billion in market cap. Facebook would have used their bundling power and their influence in the Wintel ecosystem, and we'd be talking about Bing now, not Google. So some final words. Why do we have an economy? Economy is supposed to support a middle class, full stop, and our middle class is getting the crap kicked out of it. And I think at some point we got to do the math and see that the rise of big tech is directly correlated with a slowdown in the growth of wages among the middle class, which is a big issue. Our middle class, which is the greatest force of good, I think, in the history of mankind, the US middle class is suffering. It will not be easy. Amazon spending a ton of money in this town, 88 full-time regulars. By the way, HQ2 is definitely here. Definitely here. It's ridiculous. Toronto, oh, I live in rain 4 months a year, 8 months a year, and I'm going to spend 4 months a year in Toronto. What happens when you're 53 and worth $130 billion? You start measuring every moment, because the only thing you can't control is your mortality. Do you think a man with $130 billion is going to spend 4 hours, much less 4 months a year in Indianapolis? This is ridiculous. This is going to be the HQ, because Jeff Bezos is smarter than any of us and realizes the only thing standing between him and probably $2 trillion market cap is, simply put, regulation. So you guys aren't going to regulate. I don't know if any of you are from DC, but DC isn't going to regulate the local boys. So within 1 year, Jeff Bezos is going to be throwing out the first pitch of the Nationals game. HQ2 is going here. All the other 19 cities are being played as fools to mature the most irrational term sheet, which they will then take to the civic officials here, who will not be able to resist the notion of detonating a prosperity bomb. This is where HQ2 is going to be, full stop. I believe every issue in business, and I have to wrap up, can be solved with a saying or an episode from Star Wars.
Search your feelings, you know it to be true.
Search your feelings, you know this to be true. So imagine two ecosystems and try and get rid of the gag reflex and your fears about being called a wimp or European when you say the company should be broken up. We have one ecosystem, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. Imagine a second ecosystem where these companies are broken up into Amazon, AWS, Amazon Fulfillment, Apple, iTunes, YouTube, Google Chrome, Google Cloud, Facebook Messenger, Instagram, WhatsApp. Which ecosystem has more jobs, more M&A, a broader tax base, more millionaires, maybe fewer billionaires, but more millionaires. Which ecosystem is better for the middle class? Search your feelings. You know this to be true. We don't break these companies up because they're evil. That's bullshit. They're no less or more evil than us. We don't break them up because they avoid taxes. Everybody here avoids taxes. It's our responsibility to elect people to hold them accountable. We don't break them up because they're job destroyers. We need job destroyers. We break these guys up because we are capitalists. My name is Scott Galloway. I teach at NYU, and I appreciate your time.
That's great stuff, Scott. Thank you very much. I do know who you are now, so
Thanks.
thank you. We have time to take a few questions from the audience. So if there are any communist sympathizers and fifth columnists who would like to toss out a ball, please put your hand up and we'll get a microphone to you to ask Scott a question. Oh, does it have to be? Okay, all right. So
Please introduce yourself.
we need to get the microphone.
Get you a mic. It's coming over.
Can you just wait 1 second? It's just coming. Yeah, it's just coming.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Brown. I'm a product manager at Capital One. My question was, based on how much data these companies have gathered already, what is your assessment of how much it would take to rebuild someone or a model of someone based on the demographic and engagement data they've accumulated and that they have access to?
The answer is I don't know, but I like the idea. Based on how much porn is associated with my ID now, I like the idea of a reset button. This notion of being forgotten, I think it's a fantastic notion. So I see it as a feature, not a benefit. I'm not worried about not being served more and more Audi ads because I surf the site for BMW or whatever. I don't feel my life's going to get a lot worse if we were able to restart. And I never used to think that way. I used to think that privacy was only, if you were complaining about privacy, you were an old white guy in Brussels or DC, and I've kind of come full circle on it and think that we've gotten to a point now where we're going to get more and more disturbed by what we've seen. So how long will it take? I don't think it'll take that long.
You may not have to recreate, because one of the regulatory... So in Europe, sorry to be socialist, when the Commission got pissed off with the banks and said the banks have a senile oligarchy that needs to be... one of the regulatory options that was taken was to force the banks to open up so that with the customer consent, your bank account can be visible to third parties to access the data. So one regulatory option isn't necessarily to rebuild the data, but to force the big four to open up their data so that under your control, you could give third parties access to that.
And Apple's trying to develop or trying to differentiate their strategy. Tim Cook, for the first time, did sort of a drop, kind of a overtly criticized Facebook. But Apple's basically zigging while everyone else is zagging and saying, we don't want your data. And that's a tangible, that's a really, I think, an intelligent business strategy. But again, I would argue...
They have a device market, so...
Yeah, exactly. It's in their best interest. Apple's, in my opinion, right now, one of the biggest perversions or examples of perversions of society, when they can reject a court order from the FBI or an FBI-sanctioned court order to search the phone of a terrorist, and Apple says no, and the public supports it. So I'm convinced we have our new Jesus Christ. It's Steve Jobs. This shouldn't be called the iPhone X. It should be called the iPhone Cross. I think we've become totally perverted under the auspices of big technology. We no longer worship at the altar of kindness and character, but of innovation and money. We become totally perverted by these guys.
I only ever saw an iPhone as a secondary sexual characteristic, so...
There you go.
I'm on the same page. We have a question.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Scott. Thank you for your keynote. Alex, I'm with LifeID, a blockchain-based identity company, and I'm from Seattle, land, obviously, of Amazon. Love a good debate. I think critical thinking is important to growth.
Yep.
Do you have any?
You're about to disagree with me, so bring it on.
No. Actually, do you have any recommendations for someone who has a counter view to the one you're proposing?
Any recommendations?
Yeah, like a
Keep
book.
it to yourself. Oh, look. I get it wrong all the time. What I'm trying to do is catalyze a conversation. And the conversation over the last 24 months, or the last 10 years until the last 12 months, was which CEO of these companies was more Jesus-like or should run for president. And I think that we have to have serious conversations about this stuff. Let me be clear, on the whole, I think big tech is a net gainer for the US. The regulation is going to come out of Europe because on the whole, Europe may not be a net gainer. We register a lot of upside in the US from big tech, a lot of upside. And we're having a serious conversation around some of the downsides, job destruction, tax avoidance, privacy, abuse of monopoly power. In Europe, they register all of the downside with a fraction of the upside. There are very few university buildings or hospital wings named after Facebook or Google billionaires in Europe. Margaret Vestager is about to go gangster on big tech. Everyone's talking about regulation coming out of Washington. Washington doesn't have the will or the collective IQ to take on big tech right now. We have a reverse D-Day that's going to break out. The biggest conflicts of the 20th century broke out in continental Europe, and the next big war is about to break out in continental Europe, and that is continental Europe is about to go big time after big tech.
What about,
they are saving us, not vice versa this time.
What about if you break up the big four and then all of a sudden you have Baidu, Apple, Tencent step into the gap, then the next big war actually could be in retaliation to stupid trade tariffs and things, and like things could get out of control, you know?
So, but just on your point, one of the best arguments against not breaking them up is that we have this incredibly innovative, strong Chinese companies, and we need big guys to push back on them. I would argue that 11 amazing companies could push back just as hard and compete just as well with Chinese companies as 4 big ones.
We have one more question down the middle here, and then the last one over there, yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Philip Andre. I work with a group called Ipsity and have been around David for more years than he and I wish to remember. Excellent speech, a lot of very good and compelling content. We're sitting in Washington, D.C. today, probably less than a half a mile from the White House and probably about a mile from Congress. I almost feel like you need to be doing the State of the Union or the state of the globe, because what you said is bigger than simply we need to bust these 4 up. It's also about the fact that, as David has rightly put it, we've got to worry about Alipay, and we've got to worry about Tencent, and we've got to worry about all those other global companies. But that idea of stimulating the economy with 11, not 4, sounds very exciting.
So do you get any hearing in the like the political sphere? Do these guys pay any attention? Or?
Yeah, so one of the wonderful things about the work we're doing now at NYU is I get to hear from really interesting, thoughtful people, and including in Washington. And the really fun thing about this is it seems to be a bipartisan issue. It seems to be something that people on the far left and the far right are embracing. They come at it through different angles, but it's an exciting time to be talking about this. Unfortunately, I think the other place, or not fortunately or unfortunately, but the other place you might see this real pushback or regulation or talks of breaking them up come out of is not just Brussels. The other really likely place is an attorney general in a red state. Because if you look at red states, effectively these 4 firms have been amazingly efficient vessels for transferring wealth from the rest of the world to the US and then from the middle of the US to the coasts. And so the AG in Kansas and Missouri doesn't have a lot to lose, and he or she's going to see the fastest blue line path to the governor's mansion is to make a populist argument against the company that in 0.00055 seconds is putting their agencies and their local retail stores out of business. So we might see a red state AG go after these guys, which would be a lot of fun.
Let's take the last question from over here.
Hi. Hi, my name is Nakul Manjal. I'm CEO of Status Identity. So everybody please come to the startup pitch competition tomorrow.
Enough of the...
I have a question for you. I agree with a lot of what you said, but towards the end, you're positioning these companies as monopolies. So this concept of oligopoly or entrepreneurship, where you see enough competition inside of a large company to negate them being monopolies as a whole. Have you researched what's going on inside of these companies enough to make such
That's a fair point. I mean, 92%, is that really a monopoly, Scott? I mean, aren't you exaggerating slightly?
So it's a fair question. I'm not sure I know the answer in terms of entrepreneurship or whether they're different companies. But we talked about Google at 92%. We talked about Amazon. Facebook and Google combined are now 2/3 of all digital marketing. 104% of all growth in digital marketing goes to 2 companies. Kids come to my office hours and never want to talk about brand strategy or digital marketing. They want to talk about jobs. And they'll say, I'm thinking about going into digital marketing. And my answer is the same. It's a fantastic career as long as you work for Google or Facebook. Because if you're in digital marketing and you're not working for those two, you join newspapers and magazines, and that your business is now in structural decline. And again, I don't think they're doing anything wrong. I think it's just we would see so much competition. If we broke Facebook up into Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, and WhatsApp, you don't think one of those firms would say, I know, in an effort to differentiate our proposition to advertisers, let's put in place crazy amounts of security that A, make sure everyone has a legitimate identity so they can't do really awful things, and two, we're going to advertise to Procter & Gamble and Unilever, both of who I work with, that we're good for America. We can guarantee you we won't be weaponized by an intelligence arm of the Russian government. By the way, that's the same guarantee that the Post makes, the New York Times makes, NBC makes, but Facebook's not willing to make it. So one of them would say, I got an idea. Let's say, hey, you know what? We put in place the standards that were good for America. And I can tell you a lot of advertisers would like that, but right now advertisers have no choice. The correct word for Facebook and Google is not so much monopoly as it is monopsony. And that is, I don't think we're the consumers. I think advertisers are the consumers, and they have no choice right now. But look, I buy into this notion. One of the things, and I would love your opening comments, there's a certain, the most dangerous thing is this notion of these conferences that network effects, capital, technology make these types of attributes in this type of world impossible to avoid, that this is the world we live in. I believe that is just such bullshit. The world is what we make of it. We can have our cake and eat it too. We can have technology serving us. We can have more competitive markets. We can have more jobs, a stronger middle class. It is time to break these guys up. We need to oxygenate our economy.
Ladies and gentlemen, listen, I'm voting for him. I don't know how you feel about it, but I've seen the future. Scott, you were fantastic, but more than that, you were interesting, and I can give no higher compliment.
Oh, thanks for saying that. Thank you. Thanks for saying that. Thanks, Bob. Thank you.
Please.